All right, everyone, welcome to the Wednesday, August 16th Istio combined work group meeting. First up on the agenda, we have Eric on behalf of the 119 RMs.
All right, and Kalia, hopefully you can hear me, and Kalia will hopefully have some additional stuff, but I just wanted to make a comment, at least here, that the 1.19 beta.0 was built last week, and it's available for testing. I don't know the upcoming plans. I believe there will be a beta.1 spun at some point here soon. And I guess some of the key things to look at least from my mind, are the 1.19 docs. I know we used to always have, the community testing day and have people go through the docs, and we haven't had that in a while. But preliminary.istio.io is basically the version of the docs that we will publish when we ship 1.19. So any changes that we want to put in there to be available when we ship should be done at this point. I don't know, Kelly, is there anything else you wanted to mention from a test perspective?
Yeah, I was going to ask what the status of the performance tests that, I think Miriam was working on them a couple releases ago. So yeah, I just wanted some information on that, and if there's anything that I need to do to fit that into the plan for the release at the end of the month. And then I also wanted to say that I'm planning on releasing beta.1 on Friday. I'll be out the next 2 days, but I'll have the PRs ready to go so that the other release managers can just approve them when it's time. Or if people need the full week, we can also release them on Monday.
Yeah, for the performance tests, I ran them on the beta.0. It was a little bit more challenging than running them on the regular one, so it took a little bit more effort. But yeah, I was able to get them, so I'll try to push up a PR with all the performance numbers.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Kalia. All right, Eric, Kelly, anything else on release?
I don't have anything, but just like I said, the key is the beta's out there. Please get any testing that you want done so we can get fixes in before we get to the release candidate builds.
That actually reminded me of something. So for 119, do we have any significant changes in the docs or new features or whatnot in the docs that we can direct folks to focus on? Anything? No. Okay, sounds like that's a no. All right, then if there's nothing else, let's move to John's agenda. Hey, John, are you on?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, this, I think I talked about it a few weeks ago. We've had a lot of issues in the past with the external name, and that our implementation is basically terribly broken. Kind of a PR to fix it, but it's not very straightforward because it makes a lot of behavioral changes. So I wanted to bring it to people's attention to, I guess, two things. One, I think we should merge this in some form and at the very least enable an ambient. But we could also potentially enable in sidecars. So there's kind of two questions. Is the new logic correct? And then do we enable it by default for sidecars? Hopefully there's agreement that we should enable it for ambient, because the only reason we have the current logic, I think, is because of backwards compatibility. I can give some more context on what's broken today and what the change does, but I just wanted to set kind of what I'm looking for here. So any questions before I discuss more? Cool. So I don't know how familiar everyone is with external name. It's kind of a somewhat obscure Kubernetes feature. So I'll give some background. Here's an example service. And what this does is it puts an entry, it's basically just a DNS entry. That's all it is if you don't have Istio. The only thing that changes when you make something like this is that bxt will now do a CNAME resolution to b.echo.service.cluster.local. Usually you're not pointing to another service in the cluster. It's usually like something external. So you'd have like a service like my database, and then the external name is aws.database.com or whatever. The ports here, you can see I put ports. Ports actually don't matter because it's, like I said, entirely DNS. So the ports are completely ignored. So what Istio does today with this is basically turns it into a DNS service entry. So we actually do care about the ports. We only create, services on the ports that they specify, even though they don't matter in Kubernetes. And because there's no VIP or cluster IP or anything, we match only on host header, SNI, or the port for TCP. So the most common issue we see with this is that someone defines a service entry like this, and now all of a sudden all traffic on port 80 goes to b.echo. Which is terrible. I don't know if there's any nicer way to say it. It's really bad. A lot of people have complained about it, and that's really the main issue. But we also don't get like this b.echo, the actual destination is kind of an opaque thing that we just do DNS resolution. So in this example, even when we match traffic to this external name, we don't do like proper load balancing, auto MTLS, telemetry, anything like that. We just send it to the service IP, and then kube-proxy takes over. So it's really quite bad all around. That's kind of the current state. Any questions? Yeah, Costin.
Any reason we just cannot let it pass through? I mean, just treat it as pass through.
That's mostly what my PR does.
Okay, good.
So I'll get into that. It's not quite the same, and I think that's actually a valid answer what you said. But there's a few issues that I try to address with this rather than just ignoring it.
At least for ambient, I think the requirement remains that users should be able to enable ambient without any behavior changes.
Yes.
And the behavior is well defined in Kubernetes, meaning that if I do, any operation should be basically I get a CNAME and the original IP that CNAME is backed by.
Yeah, so I think in ambient, there's two parts. One, in ztunnel, ztunnel doesn't need any awareness of this, right? It operates at TCP, so it has no idea that you sent it to bxt. It just knows you sent it to b.echo, right? So that part's easy. We do nothing for ztunnel. For waypoint, it's practically the same because we're matching based on service IP as well. So we'll still match on b.echo, and there's almost nothing we need to do. The only thing, well, let me get into the solution and then I'll get back to waypoint. I think that we may actually, what you said may make sense for waypoint. We may actually just do nothing for waypoint. I'll have to think about that a bit more. And it will be easier to talk about once I explain what I did for sidecars and why. Okay, so what I came up with was we would treat these new external name things as a unique thing, which I called alias. We could just call it external name, I guess would probably be more clear. But basically, instead of creating a fully new service with its own listener and cluster and match and everything, we just say that bxt is an alias for b.echo. So anywhere that we would match, b.echo.service.cluster.local, like in a host header match for HTTP, we'll also match bxt. The reason is that we do HTTP host name based matching. So if you did curl bxt, we want it to go to b.echo, but it's not going to because it doesn't match. So we would basically say instead of having a list of instead of b.echo and b.echo.service.cluster.local and all the variants, we'd also append to that the external name one so that they both match. We do the same for TLS if we're doing SNI match. For TCP, there's no match on anything like this. It's just IP, so there's nothing to change. And then the final thing is that if you point to a external name service in a virtual service, like you say the destination is b-x, we would just rewrite that to where it's actually pointing to the b.echo. That probably wouldn't be necessary really, but it makes it a bit more backwards compatible, since we do have to consider that we had some support for that in the past. I think that's it. So it's really just adding a couple extra matches and some allowing you to use that as a destination, but otherwise it's pretty close to what Costin said about just not even considering it at all. I think the one difference in ambient now would be just being able to use it as a destination. But otherwise that's it, because we would match on IP and we already do nothing for IP matches here. Yeah, go ahead, Austin.
So I couldn't comment. In reality, with external name, and I actually spent quite a bit of time with this subject. The HTTP header, the host header, is a cluster.local one, not the external name, because the HTTP client is not rewriting. So adding the extra will probably not do anything at best, and it will probably break something at worst, because again, the expectation is to make an HTTP request. Host header is a local service name dot namespace dot svc. And at least for ambient, we definitely want to keep it exactly transparent so we don't break anything. Waypoint is the one that actually I'm very interested, because HTTP semantics for external name are clearly not defined or broken, because no, www.example.com will not accept a header with cluster.local. So it's probably broken for anyone attempting to use external network for HTTP. Now, if it is a backend ref, so basically not front end, but the back end of a gateway, then we can actually, since it's an opt-in, you're not breaking any changes, just you're attaching a route to a gateway or waypoint with backend ref, a service with external name. That's where we know it's exactly HTTP and we can rewrite the header and do the right thing. So, and that's very important, because with HTTP is not usable in any practical way without this host name rewrite. And doing host name rewrite at TCP, it's weird in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, couldn't you say the same for even in cluster services too? Like they get the external host name if it's coming from the gateway. And you can, I mean, in virtual service today, you can rewrite the host name if you want.
You could, yes. I mean, that's wonderful, but again, it's not something that it's working, or is. I mean, it's not how. So I'm mostly interested in the correct behavior of external name when it's a backend ref, when the service is part of a backend ref, and where it's clear we should rewrite, and it's opt-in and all that. What we do for Istio, I don't know. It's leave it the way it is, or fix it. I'm happy either way. It's broken one way. It's not going to be perfect either way. And I think with zTunnel, we are in agreement that adding zTunnel is completely transparent and doesn't mess with it. So it's basically, I'm fine with the proposal. Just want to make sure when a proper gateway is used, that we do the header rewrite and do the right things there.
Yeah.
Even for waypoint, I'm more or less okay. I mean, it's again, my interest is strictly for gateway behavior to be usable.
No, I completely see your rationale. I'm just a bit concerned, like, why do we care about that for external name services, but not for any other services? Like, what makes them special? It seems like it applies to everything, not just external names.
I didn't say I don't care about other things. I said that for this subject, we should do the right thing for external name, and then we should do the same thing for other things, not. And in practical terms, I'm actually trying to make it work for having external name cloud run or having external name. I mean, make it more usable with the gateway semantics.
Yeah. Any other opinions on this? Yeah, I think the Gateway Working Group actually says don't use external name as a backend ref. Greg, go ahead.
I mentioned it in the PR too, but for the, I guess, new alias field in the service model in our code, would that be used for anything else other than external name services?
I certainly hope we don't add add more. I feel like external name is not great functionality, but we have to support it because it's in Kubernetes core. So I probably wouldn't want to see expanded use. Like in theory, we could make a service center equivalent, but I don't think we should do that, at least not without some more context or evidence. We could probably call the type explicitly external name instead of alias if we want to be a bit less indirect.
Yeah, I guess I was just wondering if it was kind of a one-off field or if it was going to end up being more multi-purpose than just external names. But sounds like that's not the goal.
We add more APIs, and I don't see a path to we're adding more APIs that would use it. Anyone? It sounds like no one really has strong opinions one way or the other on this. Maybe we just move on to the next topic. Oh, that was the last topic. So
Yep, that was it.
just chat. How's everyone doing? Anything we should talk about?
So what is the conclusion? We are going to make a change in Istio. It will be slightly backward incompatible in 120 or?
I don't know. It didn't seem like anyone here had strong opinions. So I was going to ask some people directly offline and get some consensus. I think, I don't know. It's definitely useful. I think it's a useful change, but it's just the backwards compatibility story. Is it better to be right or better to be backwards compatible?
Well,
And this
we
is-
can. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, this is also related to the most recent social media negative around Istio too, right?
A little bit. Yeah,
Darren?
I started this like a whole year ago, so it was before that.
Oh, yes, for sure. But yeah, he made a big point recently too.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah. So I guess my question is how is this related to, is this just for user onboarding to mesh and smooth their transition easy? Like what would be our guidance of using service entry and egress gateway? Would that be the next stage for them to move to if they want proper egress control?
I think it's kind of onboarding, but it's kind of more. Like I think generally we wouldn't recommend external name for most use cases, but it's a Kubernetes field, people can do it, right? So there is an issue that they onboard and suddenly things blow up, which is bad. But there's actually a worse issue where they're running in production and using Istio for many years, and then some random developer creates one service on port 80 or whatever, and their entire cluster has an outage. That's actually a bigger risk, I think, than the onboarding frictions, which is something that we've had expressed by many Istio users. So a lot of them end up having like extra policies blocking external name usage once they adopt Istio, because otherwise you're just one YAML away from an outage.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's because the current support for external service, right? Without your proposal. So now I guess I'm trying to understand the guidance for users. I mean, I understand they would have external service before they even move to Istio, right? Or they could, their developer can add it anytime, even though they're already on Istio, like the scenario you just outlined. I'm trying to understand, like if I'm a user, how am I think through like from what would the recommendation we give to the user between this and service entry? Because I feel like there's quite a bunch of overlap between the two, right?
The way I look at it, this is not, external name's not a replacement for service entry at all. Service entry adds a first class understanding of some thing that's typically external, but could be anywhere. External name is just like an alias. So if you alias to something we don't understand, like you have an external name to google.com, it still doesn't do anything, right? It doesn't help. It just lets the client use a different name. So it's not a replacement. It doesn't, just having an external name service pointing to google.com with my change, I mean, doesn't somehow make google.com a first class thing that we report telemetry on and can do TLS and apply policies and whatnot. It's strictly a client thing that impacts their DNS. So all the guidance is really still the same. Like use service entry if you need to do service entry things. And if you like to make your life more complicated and give yourself headaches, then sure, add an external name for it so you can call it by foo instead of foo.com. But I wouldn't recommend that personally.
Okay, and you could do the same in service entry too, right? To call foo to foo.com.
If you use the DNS mode, yes, you can do the same.
Okay.
But if you don't, then you can't. So.
Got it. That's the external name could potentially bridge the gap if you need to. Yeah.
Is more flexible because you can put an arbitrary host name. With service entry, it's always the Kubernetes format, service name.namespace.service.cluster.local, which is good.
So I think our guidance should be never use external name. It's not an Istio thing. We, if we fix it, it will not change in any way the behavior defined by Kubernetes. I mean, we should stop trying to assign new meanings to things that are, defined by Kubernetes in a particular way because it's too risky and doesn't bring any value to us, really.
Yeah, I think the guidance from everyone, including Kubernetes, is not to use external names. So I would say that ours should follow that as well.
Yeah, given the risks that you mentioned, I think it's reasonable to opt even to make the backward compatible change. I kind of changed my mind. I mean, if we can match the behavior of Kubernetes and not interfere in any ways, then in Istio as well, and as you said for the quasi tunnel, then it's probably worth making the change.
Okay, I think probably, I think in my PR I have it on by default, but that's just mostly to get the test. I think it probably makes sense to ship it off by default for one release so that we can start making noise about it and then turn it on because it can break some existing Istio users. But I agree that it's worth doing. We just need to make a lot of noise about it to make sure people are aware.
So do we want to enable it even for sidecar? Do we want to stage this for, I guess if we stage for ambient, people are not using ambient, so we're not getting feedback either.
Yeah, I think for ambient, we'll do this no matter what. So I think I need to go, well, I don't know actually how it works in ambient with my PR. We have no test for it, so I'll probably go add tests. But ambient's fine because this only breaks existing Istio users and there's no existing Istio ambient users.
Yeah.
That need backwards compatibility anyhow, so that's fine. And then, yeah, so definitely for ambient and then for sidecars, we'll add an option, which will be off for 120 and then on for 121.
But for zTunnel, it's pretty clear. Cannot break anything because it's not even visible for zTunnel.
zTunnel doesn't
know about it.
Yeah, sounds good. I mean, the outage you outlined, it's a major issue, which we also see it on social media and people complain about Istio. Yeah, I think the plan is reasonable.
Okay. Anything else you don't want to talk about, or we can end early?
Yeah, I think we're good. Thanks.
Alrighty.
Everybody at 10.
In 10 o'clock.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.